Hey everybody, so it's time to continue along with our season previews, and we are up to the Chicago Blackhawks. So the Chicago Blackhawks, after years of being a playoff team, a Stanley Cup team, had a really rough season last year. They finished with only 76 points, dead last in the Central Division, and things kind of came apart for them last season. The train finally ran off the tracks, and they did not have a good year last year, and I do not expect anything to be much better this season. This is a team that they were good for a long time, and they got 3 Stanley Cups out of it, and they were always one of the top teams in the West, and that years of being really good have just led to a diminished prospect pool, late round draft picks, rather than early draft picks. A lot of money being spent on players that don't necessarily live up to those contracts anymore. And this is a team that, when you look at now, there's a lot of names that the casual hockey fan are not going to recognize. There are a lot of names that even I don't really know who the player is or much about them. They've got a lot of money invested into older players at this point, guys who were huge stars and key players during their Stanley Cup runs, but are now up into their 30s, some into their mid-30s, and just they're not the same. So this team, I expect them to finish last in the Central Division again. They're not a bad team, so to say. They're certainly not like Vancouver or Ottawa or anyone like that, where they're a downright bad team. But they're an okay team. They're a average, middle-of-the-road, mediocre team. And in a division as good as the Central, with all the great teams in the Central, that's just not going to cut it. I expect this team to finish last. They're not going to beat teams like Winnipeg, Nashville, St. Louis, Minnesota, Dallas even. They're not going to keep up with teams like that. So let's look at their lineup, see what we got here, and you will know what I mean when I say that there are a lot of names here that the casual hockey fan is not going to know. So the top line, Again, these lines are done by Roster Resource. They're not set in stone. Lines are never set in stone, but this is just what Roster Resource has right now for their lines. Top line is Chris Kunitz, Jonathan Toews, and Alex DeBrincat. Brandon Saad, Nick Schmaltz, and Patrick Kane bring out your second line. Your third line, Sakura coming out of Northeastern, Anisimov, and Edsel. And then your fourth line is John Hayden, Marcus Kruger, and Andreas Martinson. On the back end, your top pair still Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook. Gustafsson and Ruda are your second pair, and then Manning and Dahlstrom is your third pair, with Corey Crawford potentially in goal, and then Cam Ward brought in as the backup. Your extra players are Kampf and Nielsen up front, and Hillman is your seventh defenseman. I don't know any of these players. So not deep on either forward or the back end beyond what their lineup is. Not much for organizational depth, and that is a direct consequence of being good for so long. You're not going to get these big name prospects. You're not going to get young players that everybody knows, because you're drafting late in rounds rather than early in rounds. So, with the exception of the first round, where generally everyone is good, that's not how it works out, but everyone is thought to be good. After that, when you're picking late in the second round, late in the third round, your chances of hitting a NHL caliber pick there is a lot less than hitting an NHL caliber pick if you're picking fifth or third in the round. So, not organizationally deep at all anywhere. They are missing 2 defensemen on injured reserve. They'll at least start the season on injured reserve. Connor Murphy and Gustav Forsling are both injured right now. Murphy looks like he's out deep into the season. Forsling could be back in the beginning of November, so he might only miss a month. But where to begin with this lineup? Let's start in goal. Corey Crawford missed a large portion of last season with concussion-like symptoms and vertigo. I'm not sure if he's over that yet. I think I read something the other day where it was saying Crawford may not be ready to start the season. I think it said he hopes to be ready to start the season, but he may not be. So they brought in Cam Ward to be the backup, and backup goaltending was a huge problem for them last season. Well, once Crawford went out, they could not get stable goaltending. So Cam Ward at least gives them somebody who is a solid backup. He's been around the league for a long time. He's a decent goaltender. And if Crawford does have to miss some time, he can start for a few weeks to a month and stabilize things there. So they're in much better situation as far as backup goaltending goes. Corey Crawford, I mean, without him, there's no chance of them being good. Even with him, I don't think they're going to be a very good team. But they're certainly better with Corey Crawford in net. So if he can't start the season on time, that's going to be rough for the Blackhawks. But hopefully he gets over these issues that he's having and he can play well this season. On defense, just not very good, especially in the same division where you have defense cores like Winnipeg's and Nashville's and Minnesota's. This is just not very good. Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook are both in their mid-30s now, and neither guy is the player that they were even 3-4 years ago. So they're really on the downswing of their careers. And then after that, it's pretty much just a shit show. Gustafsson and Ruda, they're okay, but they're nothing spectacular. Dahlstrom, I don't even know. Brandon Manning, he's coming over from Philadelphia. He's a pretty solid guy. He's a physical guy, which Chicago hasn't had in a while. So having a good physical guy on the back end, I think, will help them. But he's a bottom pair defenseman, and that's what he is. He's not a guy who's going to jump up and start playing top 4 minutes. He is a third-pairing defenseman. He's a solid third-pairing defenseman, but that's just what he is. And then up front, I mean, Jonathan Taves has gone downhill so fast over the last couple of years. It's making that contract look really, really bad, because he has fallen off the face of the earth. He is nothing compared to what he was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And you have Chris Kunitz playing top 6 minutes. Well, maybe. I think Dylan Secur, if he can score goals at the NHL level the way he did in college, I think you could see him bumped up to that top line and then Kunitz down to the third line. But anyway, right now, Roster Resource has Kunitz on their first line. Chris Kunitz was a fourth liner in Tampa last year. He played on the fourth line with Cedric Paquette and Ryan Callahan in the playoffs last year. So that just shows you the difference between where a Stanley Cup level team like Tampa Bay is at and where Chicago is at right now. A fourth liner on Tampa Bay is on the first line in Chicago. So, I mean, that shows you just where the Blackhawks are at right now. Alex DeBrincat, I love this kid. As far as young players in this team, this team that are rebuild, this is a rebuilding franchise in a way, and they're, as far as young players that are really bright spots for the future, DeBrincat is one and Schmaltz is another one. I really like those two, and I think they have long, very good careers ahead of them in this league. Second line, Brandon Saad, Nick Schmaltz, and Patrick Kane. I mean, Saad and Kane together, that's been pretty standard. Saad was not very good last year so he left Chicago, went to Columbus, and then ended up going back to Chicago. His second stint in Chicago has not nearly been as good as his first, and Patrick Kane is still performing at a very high level, but with the lack of production around him, his numbers are falling off a little bit as well. But Nick Schmaltz I like a lot. I think he, like DeBrincat, as another one of these young players that has a very bright future ahead of them and can really help this team. And then the third line, Artem Anisimov, still the third line center as he's been for the last number of years. And then Dylan Sikura coming out of college on his left side. And I don't really know this kid at all, but this Edsel kid on the right side, I don't know anything about him. Again, there are guys in this lineup that people just don't know. Casual fans certainly aren't going to recognize a lot of these names. Even I, who follows this league very, very closely, don't know some of these players. And then the fourth line, I actually like their fourth line as a fourth line. You know, these aren't star players, these aren't guys who are going to move up in the lineup, but these are guys who, in a fourth line role, I think can be very effective. John Hayden I like a lot. He's shown toughness, willingness to fight. He's a physical guy. See what you can get out of him offensively, but as a fourth line grinder, I think he's good in that spot. And he thought he played pretty well for them last year. They've brought back Marcus Kruger as a fourth line center. Again, teams that are successful tend to do this. They kind of fall in love with those players that they're successful with, and then kind of give them big contracts or give them too long of contracts, or in Kruger's case, get him back after he's been away for years. Marcus Kruger couldn't even stick in the NHL last year. He's not the player that he was when he was winning Stanley Cups with Chicago. His career's really gone downhill over the last couple of years. And again, this is a guy who Chicago looks at and they go, oh, he's been really good for us before, 5-6 years ago, let's bring him back. I don't think it's going to work out nearly as good the second time, much like it hasn't for Brandon Saad. And then Andreas Martinson, he's another fourth-line guy, and that's what he is, and he can play that role fine. So I actually don't mind their fourth line, but they are missing a lot as far as star power goes up front and goal scoring goes. Brandon Saad has got to get back to being Brandon Saad. If he doesn't, this team is going to be even worse than they were last year. Because Kane is still going to score goals, DeBrincat's going to score goals, but Kunitz probably isn't going to score that many. Saad needs to be a high-level goal scorer. Taves isn't much offensively anymore. Schmaltz, you're only going to get so much from one guy, and then you're not going to get much offense from this bottom six, I don't think, unless Sikura really shines and becomes a good goal scorer like he was in college. So he's kind of the wild card as far as goal scoring goes. If he can be a 25 goal scorer and just jump into the NHL like that, then you can see him up on that first line with Taves and DeBrincat and put Kunitz down into a bottom six role, which at this point, being almost 40 years old, is probably where he belongs. So overall, not a great lineup. This is a team in transition. This is a team who has been really, really good for a number of years. Stanley Cup level good, won 3 Stanley Cups, but they are, their window has closed with that group. They are on the downswing at this point, and this team desperately needs a rebuild. Whether they try and rebuild on the fly or just accept that they're going to stink for a few years and go full rebuild, that remains to be seen. But right now, this is not a team that is going to win a ton of games this year. I expect them to finish last in the Central Division again. Not a playoff team by any stretch, and they're a team that just needs to build for the future here. So that's what I've got on Chicago. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media, check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are down in the description. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing and expanding. The more people, the better. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.